Welcome to episode 124, I believe, of Trek Live. A little bit different location, right, Bill? How you doing this morning?
Good, good. Happy to be trying something new, and streaming live on Twitter. So you can find us, obviously, if you're seeing us now, you're on Twitter. You're probably looking at Trek Live Dan's Twitter stream. You can interact with us by clicking into the stream and then viewing us through Periscope, which you can log into with your Twitter account. That gives you the ability to comment and respond to what we're saying in a way that we can see and respond to. So trying this, seeing if it works, seeing how we like it. We're hoping to maybe upload this to YouTube, maybe as a recorded video. So the YouTube content will still be there, but we're hoping this works out. So
Yeah, so it will be no issues. If no issues arise, then the copy will be uploaded to YouTube, so you can view it that way as well. So you can watch it on replay, full length. No issues, hopefully. Like Bill said, we're trying this out. Let us know if there's any issues or whatever. This is a new location. We just figured we'd try it out because we know a lot of people are on Twitter. So if you're new to Trek Live or you haven't never been here before, just a little description of what goes on here. We usually just have a live discussion between Bill and I and you guys. Obviously, you guys drive the conversation. Bill and I will usually pick a topic. This week's topic is Season 3 recap of the original series. So usually we start out with the show with doing because both Bill and I are rewatching constantly, so we do a rewatch recap. That's a mouthful. But that is pretty much today's topic. That's where today's topic stems from. So, Bill, how's your rewatch going?
it's going slow, but I watched Sins of the Father in the last week from TNG Season 3, which is where I am on my kind of glacially slow rewatch.
Yeah.
Yeah, what can I say? It's classic. It's a foundational Klingon episode.
Yeah.
Getting into Worf's backstory, and you learn a lot about his familial history and how it relates to his current situation on the Enterprise. So, yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites. Some really groundbreaking, like, production design stuff there with Klingon Hall done really very innovative art direction and production design, like done with very little, making it look really big. It's definitely a favorite. Really good guest performance from Tony Todd playing his brother Kern.
Yeah.
Good Patrick Stewart stuff involving himself in the Klingon, political landscape. Definitely, yeah. I mean, it's definitely one of my favorite runs of episodes. Here. Right around now, like these it was yesterday's Enterprise, The Offspring, and then Sins of the Father. So it's definitely
good lineup.
It's a good lineup. Deja Q a few episodes before that. So a lot of hits in a short period of time. Jared Hitchcock in the chat saying Tony Todd's Kern was underused, and I would agree with that. He only appears maybe 3 or 4 times. Once in Deep Space Nine, and a couple times in TNG. But he always brings something to the table. He really good chemistry with Michael Dorn. Their scenes are always loaded with feeling and history, and they're always powerhouse sequences. Yeah. So, what about you? I mean, obviously, your rewatch is leading us into our topic.
Yeah. So I finished. I'll just talk about. I was going through season 3 of TOS because I was rewatching TOS, and I pretty much I can't remember. It's been a couple weeks. I think 2 weeks since we've talked about it, but I really put in some work as far as moving through some episodes. I think I was, last time we talked, maybe 15 or 16, I believe, and then I finished it. So, at least for me, I usually stick to a 2 episode per week schedule, but since, I don't know, I just started watching it more and wanted to finish it, excited to start Deep Space Nine. We'll get into that a little bit later, but that's where this topic at hand to stem from. Today's topic stemmed from my rewatch, so I figured we'd talk about TOS season 3 because I want to talk about it, and there's some fun things to kind of talk about in episodes
There are things to talk about.
that I want to cover. But kind of the primary thing that I'm going to switch to right now is the graphic here. I put together a see it or skip it list, and I think that's kind of a good place to start. You guys can see kind of what episodes I would recommend watching if you're going through season 3. And I'll get into why I maybe pick some and skip some. So let me just move that. All right, here it is. Pretty big list. You guys can see there is some good amount of green and there's some good amount of red on there. So I tried to keep it as even as possible. And if you guys are new to Trek Live, you know that I'm a little bit more positive on the positive side of things. So Bill, I hope you can see the graphic. I can send it to you as well.
No, I'm seeing it.
Okay. So we can kind of talk about a little bit. I think we should just jump into season 3. So
Yeah.
I'll let everyone process the graphic here. Bill, first thoughts on this graphic and season 3 in general.
Just my general thoughts on the third season in general. It's interesting. I think some of the campiest moments, some of the things that kind of give TOS its reputation as like old 60s campy show. Quite a few of those things I think stem from things that you get in season 3.
Yeah.
I think the change in the production staff, the writing staff, change in management, top new producer Fred Freiberger for season 3. I think maybe leaned into some tendencies and traits that gave it that little bit more campy feel, a little less self-serious feeling from the first couple of seasons. There are some hits. I think there are some really good episodes mixed throughout the season. I think there are some really repetitive, mediocre episodes as well.
Yes.
Episodes that kind of feature same flavors, mostly driven, I think, by limitations in terms of their budget and, being strapped for time. Lots of episodes with, empty Enterprise situations, like whether it's through the crew is frozen and can't move, or it's a copy of the ship on a planet that nobody's on. Like lots of like William Shatner as Kirk kind of roaming empty corridors, and maybe with a female alien who's thorn in his side. There's quite a bit of that throughout the season, but there are some hidden gems that are well known and often cited as great episodes, and I think there are some underrated ones as well, which I'm looking forward to seeing if we line up. I'm kind of looking at your document here, your see it or skip it, and I agree with a lot of it. I think one that stands out to me is There in Truth No Beauty. I like that episode. You have skip it, so that's an interesting division there. You have a see it on Plato's Stepchildren. I struggle with that one. It's interesting.
Okay.
We both agree on see it on the Empath, which is a controversial episode, very divisive. Some people really like it, some people hate it.
Yeah.
Very blind in some corners.
I'll talk about my thoughts on season 3. I think all of the I wouldn't say negative things that come from I don't know. A lot of the tropes, like you said, are that TOS gets knocked for. I feel like this is the season that it gets stemmed from. So Like I said, I'm a little bit more positive on it. So some of these episodes I'm fine with because um, part of the TOS's charm, for me at least, is a little bit of the cheesiness, is a little bit of the
Sure.
campiness, is a little bit of the um, kind of you can kind of it shows its age. It shows it's maybe okay. This is definitely a '60s show, right? So I think it definitely that's what kind of brings season 3 down for me. I think, like you said, the production side of it. There's so many instances where, especially I notice in the writing, I can get past the production side of things. But really, the writing, I feel like it struggles because I feel like there's some really good writing and some really good stories in season 1 and 2, and I think you see a really significant drop off when you get to season 3 because even with just simple things like dialogue, there's some inconsistencies with at least how I would feel these characters would react and things that they would say. I think there's some dialogue with Spock that just doesn't really sit well with me. Well, would he react that way? Um,
Yeah,
or would
that is actually interesting that you say that. One of the I don't mean to interject, but one of the things that you would find if you like read into like the history of the production of season 3, Leonard Nimoy was constantly battling with the writers during this season,
Mhm.
unhappy with choices that Spock made and like the way he would react to things, lines of dialogue. He struggled with the
Yeah,
third season.
yeah,
Evidently, I wasn't there. I can't speak firsthand, but
yeah,
I've read
yeah.
things over the years that indicate that he was in a constant battle and was kind of left with a bad taste in his mouth many times.
Mhm.
Just not happy with the way Spock was handled in episodes
Mhm.
throughout the season.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think
yeah,
the it's the same with kind of the other characters as well. I think maybe not so much Kirk or McCoy, but the background characters, Scotty and Chekhov and Sulu. I think there's some dialogue and there's some character stuff that I can definitely see the writing just go
sure.
down. So that's kind of my major thoughts on season 3. I don't think it's as bad as people say. Um, I
Yeah,
will say that there are some really tough episodes to get through. Um, yeah, I'll touch on the empath because that's a see it for me. Um,
sure. Yeah, I'm curious to hear what you have to
I
say about
think
it.
I really like that episode because it really highlights the big three. Right, the TOS structure is kind of built around the big three characters: Kirk, Spock, McCoy. This is Kirk, Spock, and McCoy story type. Right, this is they beam down to a planet. They get stuck. The crew's in the ship. The ship is in jeopardy. Someone's in jeopardy.
Right.
So we've seen that a lot in this season. But I think this one in particular sets itself apart because of I think the loyalty that McCoy. Spoiler alert! If you guys haven't seen it, you guys need to. He just the way he sacrifices himself.
Sure.
It's a tough decision during the episode that Kirk has to make is made for him by
Yeah.
McCoy. So I think that's kind of a cool loyalty moment for just those, not just McCoy, but the three characters. So
Right.
yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, the empath is a really good episode
Yeah.
for the trio. It's a really good example if you wanted to highlight the way those three characters interact and feel about each other, and how they deal with crisis together and
Mhm.
battle through. Um, it's a really good one. I think it's a really good McCoy episode for all the reasons you just cited. I think it,
Mhm.
it highlights his character in a way that you certainly get throughout the show. He's always involved and is always on these landing party missions and
Mhm.
has moments. But that's an episode that really, I think, puts its shoulder into exploring McCoy's character and putting him in a position to make the choice, like to take to take the situation by by its collar and
Yeah.
really like
Yeah.
make it go the way he wants it to go,
Mhm.
which doesn't happen very often. So I like the empath for all those reasons. I know a lot of people struggle with it for the dark turns it takes, for the minimalist. Like that one and
Yeah.
Spectre of the Gun, which you have see it's on both of them, are kind of joined at the hip in terms of the minimal production design stuff that you get in this season in particular. You get in Spectre of the Gun, the super minimal Western sets that are like half completed. That I think really, I think actually like plays into the episode. I think it helps the episode. It makes it more weird and kind of creepy and yeah, I think it adds to the atmosphere of the whole situation. And then the empath obviously is this big, vast black chamber that has nothing except what's needed. It's kind of staged like a stage play almost, while they're in that situation with the Visians, I think they're called, the aliens. So yeah, they're two prime examples of the production limitations and having to make bold choices to deal with the lack of money.
Yeah. No, but I think you're right. I think that definitely plays into it, right? Because it's really minimalist. It's really essential. There's nothing extra. It's really to the point, and
let's focus on the characters.
Yeah, that's kind of.
I think it.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Jared Hitchcock, who's in the chat, mentioned, and I think it's one that bears mentioning. We've kind of talked about it before over the course of other episodes, but Spock's brain is such a unique episode in the sense that it's so so infamous. Like some people struggle with like, is it a see it or is it a skip it? Is it a thumbs up, thumbs down? Like if you embrace the corniness and you like the over the top stuff from TOS, it's right up your alley. I think it's tailor made for sitting around having a few beers and watching. It's the episode for that. If you're looking to just have a good time, and some people like the premise, like the very bare bones of the premise, like this dead society on top on the planet's surface, and this super advanced society down below that is kind of dependent on a computer to keep it running. There's some interesting things in the bone marrow of that episode, like deep down, but it's so outlandishly done. Did you struggle with that at all? Was it an easy skip it, or did you?
It's a skip it with an. I think it's a skip it with an asterisk, right? The fundamentals. Sure. This kind of there's good sci-fi concepts, and there's a few other episodes that I'll touch on that have great sci-fi concepts, but. This one, Spock's brain's placement to me is really key, right? You start off first episode of the first season, you get Spock's brain. It's like, oh man, okay, it's pretty over the top, right? It's really so maybe it might be different. It might be different if it was in a different spot, but it's a skip it for me just because I like kind of over the top corniness, but this just takes it to a little bit too much. It takes it too high for me, so. It's a skip it with an asterisk, but I don't know. I could go both ways. But sci-fi concepts, the season is full of them. I think All Our Yesterdays is an underrated episode just because I loved it, actually. I think it's a great big sci-fi concept. It's got this kind of action adventure, separate the big three, into it's really fun. In that regard, but it's also like this big sci-fi concept that I really enjoyed, and a touch of romance in there with Spock is, I think it's one of the best. I would almost argue that was the season finale. I would rather switch the twos. Maybe we could talk about the last episode of the season a little bit later on. But yeah, All Our Yesterdays just great episode.
It's a great episode. Yeah. I think it really features some great Leonard Nimoy stuff, some great DeForest Kelley stuff. Their scenes with Zarabeth in the cavern are really good. I think it's some of Leonard Nimoy's best stuff. Over the course of the show, he gets these opportunities to play a more emotional Spock. Sometimes he's possessed, like in Return to Tomorrow, like it's an alien kind of infiltrating him, and it's not really Spock. And sometimes in episodes like This Side of Paradise and in All Our Yesterdays, he's for whatever the reason of the week is, having to deal with emotion. Yeah. And I think All Our Yesterdays, you get some different colors than we've gotten before. The more primitive, the what are Vulcans like if they don't suppress? What's the downside to that? Their emotions. really good guest star. I think Mariette Hartley, who plays Zarabeth, is
Very strong.
Very strong performance. Really kind of a tragic character. A prisoner sent back in time to live out her days in their ice age. Just starved for human connection, finds it in Spock. Is some really great stuff. Really, like you said, huge science fiction concept. This idea of a society that knows its end is coming. Like they know their sun is going supernova, and the way they deal with it is they send their whole population back in time.
That's such a cool idea. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have this the library with Mr. ATOS, A2Z, who has this, time travel machine that you put a disc in and it gives you a period of history to jump through.
Mm-hmm.
Just a big idea. Some really cool production design in that library. Mr. Atos is another really cool character.
Because he's got copies as well.
He's got copies.
Yeah.
He gets sense maybe like
echoes
a hologram.
or holograms or Rios. Maybe I got that as well. Yeah,
that kind of thing. Yeah. Really cool episode. Definitely one of the best. What would you say your favorite episode of the season was? Was it All Our Yesterdays or the Enterprise Incidents of Common?
Yeah, I would say that. But I mean, All Our Yesterdays really surprised me when I was watching it.
Didn't see it coming.
I didn't see it coming as much. Like going into the Enterprise incident, especially on the heels of coming off Spock's brain, I'm like, this is gonna be. I know this is gonna be good, right? But especially at the towards the end of season 3, I was ready to be done. I'm just trying to get through these episodes, and then I went through that, and it was just great. So, what do you? One thing that I did, notice going through this, there's some cool moments that are some cool things that stem to future projects and future things, right? So we get Memory Alpha is referenced in season 3. I don't know if that's referenced before that. I think that was a cool thing. And then Whom Gods Destroy, I think we get some Axonar reference.
Yeah,
with
that's where
Captain Garth and
Garth and that all stems from that episode.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. There is some underrated
canon-y
things that play out later in the series. The Tholian web, like the Tholians, obviously are a common. Like you don't see them hardly ever until Enterprise, but they're constantly always kind of referenced as like this, they're there. Peripherally in future Star Trek quite often.
So my point is, I think there's enough in this season that you definitely need to watch this season, because there are there's some great episodes, but also there's some continuity stuff that you need to see.
Another huge one, real quick, to piggyback on like what you're saying. Absolutely, it's essential. The Savage Curtain establishes like Surak, like the beginning of both Logic and Kahless is introduced in.
But he's depicted. It's funny. He's depicted as, a bad. But later on, you get the feeling that
he's
Klingons. I guess the Klingons, right? You get the feeling that this is this iconic, warrior that saved them. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess if these images, if these characters are being pulled from Kirk's head, and it's from Kirk's perspective.
True. Yeah.
And this is like post-discovery. Klingons are not necessarily, our friends.
Framed in the right light, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The guy who started the Klingon push toward, battle and honor and, war, glory, and all that stuff would be somebody Kirk would see as a problematic figure in history.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just to go off of what you said, there are countless things. If you skipped season 3, you would miss elements of the overall continuity of Star Trek being introduced, for sure. There are a lot of things.
But it's almost it's really foundational stuff, like cornerstone stuff, like Memory Alpha. All these big things. Characters.
Things that come into play later down the road.
Yeah.
In Day of the Dove, I remember we briefly talked about it when you watched Day of the Dove a few weeks back. The way that character Kang, the main Klingon in that episode, is portrayed, I think, is the kind of first step toward, the Michael Dorn Klingon, the way
Yes.
Klingons are presented in
Yep.
the TOS movies and in TNG more so. He's very concerned with honor and battle, and he's a warrior. And before that, the Klingons that we've gotten are a little bit more inconsistent as far as like what's driving them.
Yeah.
Koloth in the Trouble with Tribbles he's like a sleazy, diplomat. He's
Yeah.
not a warrior. He's a
No.
guy who, goes out and negotiates a bad treaty with somebody.
Yeah.
He does bad trade deals and stuff. He's like a politician kind of guy.
Yeah.
And then Core is he's got some of that, but
Yeah.
he's more of like an authoritarian, head of state kind of guy. Like he's not a brute the way Kang is, and that's such a common trait that we see the Klingons presented as in future Star Trek. So I think Day of the Dove is sort of the establishment of kind of a more consistent view of how Klingons kind of operate. So that's another one. There's tons of them throughout the season that I think are important references that people would lose out on if they just arbitrarily said, "Oh, season 3, that's got a bad reputation, skip it."
Yeah.
Are there other episodes that surprised you? I mean, you have 14 see-its. I had 10 when I did this. I put a poll up on Twitter. I asked people, like, what's your number of thumbs up episodes, basically.
Yeah.
And when I counted them up, and my definition of thumbs up would be like B- or higher. If it's a C+, it's like a thumb sideways, could go either way depending on the day. If it's a B+ or higher, I'll give it a thumbs up.
Okay.
And I came up with 10.
I may be a C+ or higher.
Maybe, yeah.
That's at least for me.
Sure.
Surprised me. I don't know. I guess we could talk about Plato's Stepchildren. Kind of surprised me, just because going into it, I knew people's thoughts on Twitter, and then I knew your thoughts on it. But I tried to look at it as objectively as possible.
Which is the way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And so you kind of talked about this in Spock's brain, but there is some maybe over the top stuff in this. To be an understatement, but I think there is some underlying themes in this episode that are really strong to me, and I think this maybe does fall into that C+, B- for me, just because of those themes. Just set aside the over the topness. Just kind of like Spock's brain too. Maybe this is switching over Spock's brain a little bit, but back to Plato's Stepchildren. I think that there are some themes and some performances in that episode that I think warrant it, that you should probably see it.
Yeah, and I think
because it deals with power and a
Yeah.
bunch of other stuff like that. So
it does.
And
yeah,
how we treat people.
There are definitely some interesting themes in it. I struggle with it. You make me want to go back and watch it again with fresh eyes for sure, because you highlight the things about it that work best.
Yeah.
And I like, I struggle with the characters being so thoroughly humiliated. Like it's just
that's
like
there are some cringy performances and stuff. Yeah.
It gets really rough. But it's important to note that it's like. It's conscious of that. The show is conscious of that. The performances are conscious of that. I think of them like crawling around, riding each other.
Yeah,
I know. Some really rough stuff. But they come back, like they cut to a commercial and they come back, and Spock's thoroughly like he can't even move. He's sitting there and just trying to like collect himself. And Spock is such a character who is so constantly struggling to like maintain his dignity and wants to be seen as like, so he's dealing with. I like that it makes the characters. It doesn't brush over it. It makes the characters deal with the way that makes them feel, and that they are humiliated. It's not like they just snap out of it and they're like, "Oh, I'm okay." Like there is an emotional toll that they take from those kinds of experiences that these characters are putting them through. But it's one that I have a hard time watching for all those reasons. It's one that I struggle to get through. But I do think that there are positives to be taken. I think Alexander the small person who is also kind of being tortured on that planet and has no autonomy. Like he's a slave for all intents and purposes. He's a good character, and I like the way that the crew connects with him and rescues him at the end of the day. So it's an episode of these episodes. Based on what you said, it's the one that I'm the most eager to like kind of go back to and try to watch with fresh eyes again, because you were more positive on it than I have tended to be, and I think the groupthink tends to be on that episode, which is, a good example of why it's important to do what you try to do.
Yeah.
Keep those things in check. Like, don't be driven by what other people think of these episodes.
Yeah.
Come up with your own takes. What about bottom of the barrel? Like, what's the worst episode?
The Way to Eden.
Way to Eden.
That was a really tough episode to get through. I'm trying to think of something positive. I don't know. There are some positives. I think the story concept, In Search for Eden, right, is a common sci-fi type of story. So I guess that's kind of interesting to have Star Trek's take on it, because I think that that's a little interesting. It could be an interesting. It's tough to get through. There's some cringeworthy stuff from me. I'm not really a fan of dubbed over music and singing and stuff.
There's lots of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the few times I think that the show obviously feels very much at home in the 60s as a whole, for a variety of reasons.
At least the season.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Season 3 in particular, I think, has traits that really scream 60s, even more so than the other seasons, maybe. But The Way to Eden is one of the few times where the premise feels dated, like the episode's story and the space hippies, as everybody calls them. Like, that's such a 60s. It's so specific to the 60s, and it's a specific kind of issue, and it's a specific concern that unlike many of the like social commentary kinds of stories that Star Trek tells over the course of all their shows, feel kind of timeless. They feel like they transcend the period of time that the story was built. The Way to Eden feels kind of uniquely frozen in time in 1960. It doesn't the concern of that, that problem, that concern, those kinds of situations don't feel like they transcended into future generations the way that Your Last Battlefield does, or others do.
And I feel like there's some shade being thrown, like, because a bunch of the characters would interact with the space hippies, and they'd be like, "Oh, you were a scientist, or you were this," and you threw it all away. Like, there was some little bit of shade being thrown. I'm like, I have no problem with what they're doing, so it's I don't know.
It's clearly written by. It's clearly written by, in my opinion, it seems to be written by people who struggled mightily with the idea of hippies. It's very much, like you said.
And then probably next is Turnabout Intruder.
Yeah.
Oh god, that is tough. Tough one to get through for sure.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Turnabout Intruder is another one that has specific problems that feel rooted in the 1960s. We don't want to get too hung up on it because it's self-evident and it's been talked about ad nauseum. But it is clearly very sexist.
Yes.
There are lines of dialogue in it that seem to insinuate that females can't be Starfleet captains, which thankfully Star Trek quickly dispensed with and never, referenced again. Shatner certainly gives a committed performance. He gives it his all. He tries. I don't know that it's his best performance, but it's one of his more interesting performances to watch because it's so kind of specific to its time and kind of would never be done that way again. But it's a misfire for sure. I do like the positive I would throw that episode's way is the court martial stuff, like the crew kind of slowly building toward a mutiny, to try to overtake, to get Kirk out of there. Spock, McCoy and Scotty in the corridor, plotting to do that. Like I kind of like those scenes, but it doesn't save the episode.
I was just gonna say that doesn't change the fact, but we get that from the enemy within, kind of. So it's I feel like,
yeah,
I don't know.
That idea has been
Bottom
done
of the
in
barrel.
other episodes of Star Trek.
Yeah,
for sure. There are many other episodes where the captain is possessed, or the captain's making bad choices for this reason or that.
Yeah.
And who has to deal with that and figure out how to, get him out of the captain's chair, get her out of the captain's chair, depending on who it is. But
yeah.
Not one of the best examples of that Star Trek trope. So that's towards the bottom of the barrel. And The Children Shall Lead, I think, notoriously weak episode.
Yeah.
Kid actors really driving the
Anytime
train.
there's kid actors. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another one though that it tries to have like a horror bent to it, like these misguided kids who have immense power to sway adults. It's sort of similar to Charlie X. Charlie X is a much more mature story, but I think a much better episode that tries to like go that same kind of way with misguided youth with a lot of power, overpowering adults.
Yeah.
But that's maybe my least favorite episode of all Star Trek, and The Children Shall Lead.
Yeah, I think those probably three that we just talked about are definitely up there as
the weak links.
The weak links of
Yeah.
Star Trek all time, probably.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One of the other things that is kind of highlighted, you have a hit in it out of these two episodes that I'm about to talk about. Even like costume design in these episodes is I think more bold, outlandish, like over the top. I'm thinking of
very
the Cloud
retro, yeah.
Blaine of Troyes, her guards characters costumes, like big orange, big shoulder pads, like things you would see. I feel like in other sci-fi shows of the time, like Star Trek, certainly in the first couple of seasons has its moments, particularly with female costumes that are like very 60s, very specific to the time, things that directly come out of the 60s. But I think many of the costumes don't date the same way. Like if you go back and you look at like Lost in Space costumes, sometimes do. And Lana Troyes has stuff in it that makes me think of shows like that, other shows that haven't stood the test of time quite the same way Star Trek has. So that's another example of, I think, the change at the top of the production team, the producers, the showrunner, maybe giving the green light to things like costumes, like sets that don't quite hold up as well as some things that we got in the first couple of seasons.
Yeah, because I think the first couple of seasons are a little bit more subdued, not as very outlandish, but I feel like once we get to season 3, that's when we see that really retro, these really little bit over the top, really colorful things. Yeah.
They do. They definitely do. What did you think of, speaking of that, the Cloudminder? Interesting one. It's another one kind of in line with Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, the Cloudminders. They're two episodes that are so, blatantly like morality plays about racism, about class. Like the Cloudminders, obviously, the people below, the people above, literally above in the clouds and down below in the caves.
Class system,
class system problems. Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. The black on one side, white on the other. Racism stuff. Those two episodes you have to see. It's on both of them. But I feel like those episodes can be somewhat controversial because some people find them to be too on the nose, too obvious with what they're talking about, too in your face, too bunk on the head, as some podcasts would call it. What do you think of those?
I think it's a see it just because the original series has always been on the nose, and I feel like of the time, it was groundbreaking to kind of tackle things like this, and why can't it be on the nose? Why can't it be
Yeah.
like this? Why we have plenty of episodes where these kind of themes and morality types of stories are very
Sure.
subtle, but they're there. Um, but yeah, I think it's part of season, not just season three's charm, but just TOS's charm in general is really the bare bones. This is we're just gonna lay this out. This is what it is. This is the essential things that we're trying to talk about here. This is,
Right.
so I think it doesn't have to be, very intertwined. It can be simple, but it also makes us think and talk about these things. So,
It does.
um,
I don't have a problem with it either for the reasons you out. I think things like that are addressed in Star Trek in other ways too. I think racism in particular is clearly like the theme of, say, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield,
Yeah.
talking about it here. But I think it's also a major theme in Balance of Terror, but done in a much more simple way,
yeah,
or a much more subtle way.
subtle, yeah,
The way that Spock is being reacted to in light of seeing the Romulans for the first time.
yeah,
That there are things in that episode that deal with racism just as much as Let That Be Your Battlefield does. But Let That Be Your Last Battlefield doesn't.
it's literally black
clouded.
and white,
It's literally
like in
black and white.
the episode
Oh,
where other episodes can be gray. Kind of hard to discern
Sure.
from what's going on. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And this is a show that is historically watched by kids, by children, and I don't see a problem with making it.
see
black and
no
white.
problem.
Force the conversation, make people talk about it.
I think I wouldn't even say children. I think some people,
Sure. Absolutely.
adults need to see this and
Sure.
get that
And force
driven through
people
their
to
head.
talk about it.
Yeah.
And it does. I mean, I think for those reasons, it's fine. So it doesn't bother me. It does bother some. Some people would edge their thumb down on episodes like that because they find them too on the nose, but not me.
Not me.
I'm good on both of them.
Yeah.
I enjoy both.
Yeah.
Other episodes that we haven't talked about that stand out to you, or
let's see. The Paradise Syndrome. See it. That's a fun, early kind of away mission that I'm fine with. Because it's not just like a barren wasteland planet with a different color in the background. It's actually, we're in this forest. Wherever they shot
gets
us.
to live a whole different.
Yeah.
And the best thing about that episode to me is that Kirk often talks about, he's certainly the love of his life is the Enterprise, it's the ship, but he also has these struggles with realizing what he's kind of giving up and not,
Yeah.
having those kinds of connections with people, and kind of wondering what life would have been like under other circumstances. And the Paradise Syndrome kind of forces him to live out that alternate life of not living on a starship, not having that kind of responsibility at your shoulders.
Yeah.
It's sort of a parallel life that he gets to live. It's also a big concept. You talk about big science fiction concepts, that they have to leave him behind because there's an asteroid, there's a big meteor coming that planet's way, and the ship has to go try to deal with that and divert it. That's a big problem.
But people forget how long that was. Wasn't it like months?
Yes.
It was months. It was a long time.
It was, and that's one of the things that I kind of, when I watched that episode, I think the Kirk stuff, they do a good job of making it clear that time is passing and that he's really putting down roots and he's lived a life. But I think the stuff on the Enterprise, they don't necessarily sell quite as well. That a lot of time is passing.
That's true. Yeah.
That's always my kind of. I think it's kind of a mixed bag the way that they sell that. Wow, there's a lot of time passing here. This is a big stretch of time. But I like that about the episode. It makes it feel big. It makes it feel like a bigger event, and more than just like a small, episodic stop along the way, which is an interesting.
I think it's funny because like a lot of the captains have lead these other lives, right? Because we get this with Picard as well. So it's
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's Kirk's. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There are other examples. Star Trek captain put in that similar position.
Yeah.
And this is Kirk's, and
because we can get it. We get through Archer too. Because I forget the episode, but where he's living with T'Pol, and he's Twilight,
mm-hmm. Light with TNG.
Yeah.
There are other examples for sure.
Yep.
And I think it's perfectly at home with Kirk's character arc, with the things he struggles with and the things that are on his mind. So it feels at home. For The World is Hollow, I think you have a skip it on it. That's a McCoy heavy episode. He gets that terminal illness.
Yeah, and I Still Touch the Sky. I just didn't want to fit the whole title in there. Yeah.
That's another big science fiction concept.
It is.
That's a people living on a starship thinking
they're living
on a planet.
Yeah, it's like a generational type of thing. It is a really big sci-fi concept, and it's really it really kind of comes out of nowhere because the episode starts with the whole crew's fine except the ship's doctor's dying. It's just like, whoa, we're jumping right into this thing. It's really big, like this, is McCoy gonna die? So it's a definitely, I will give it that, as a very big. So.
Sure. Yeah, and that's one of the things that it's the inherent struggle of this season, I think, is they have some big ideas, big concepts.
Yeah.
Production limitations, the struggles that they had to just execute the show, make it hard to sell some of these big ideas and to give these episodes the room they need to breathe and these kinds of stories, enough scope and scale to execute these big ideas in a way that's satisfying. Isn't always consistently there. Sometimes it is. I think All Our Yesterdays, they do a beautiful job with that. I think even the Paradise Syndrome, I'm a little more mixed on, but I think of it do execute the bigness of the concept and the it's executed well, but it's a mixed bag on some levels as well.
I think we will wrap this up here if that's okay. But I think we're gonna do a follow-up episode on this because I think it would be fun to kind of discuss. Okay, how do we fix season 3? Right, because we've talked about a bunch of different episodes, and we've even said that this foundationally this has some great potential. So I think it would be fun to kind of talk about how we could fix that, because we've proved over the last 50 minutes that this season 3 does have some good bones, has some good structure.
Agreed. Yeah, I think there's more to talk about, and we could go on all day and look at the episodes and look at the common themes and what works and what doesn't, and how they all kind of connect, and what with hindsight could have helped maybe in a perfect world. But it was fun to talk about it. It's one of the more interesting seasons to talk about because it is such an anomaly. It's such a on an island kind of a unique kind of season. This one and season 1 of TNG, I think, feel like that. They're kind of entities unto themselves with the way the shows are presented. They're a little different than the rest of the show. And I hope we touched on some of the things that make that interesting.
Yep. Usually we talk about for this third kind of smaller segment, we talk about Star Trek content that we'd like to mention. I feel like we just skip that till next week and maybe just mention as far as Star Trek content goes, we did have Trek After Dark, but also we did a Star Trek pub quiz with Trekkie Rob. So that's probably, I don't want to speak for Bill, but I would probably quote that as probably the Trek content to look for, because I think he plans on doing more of them. So definitely check that out.
Can't recommend that highly enough. It was a great time. Rob does a great job putting fun. Really a big group of people, wide variety of people from all over the world participating, and it's a great time. It lasted about an hour and a half, I want to say, and it's an hour and a half well spent. So keep an eye on Trekkie Rob's Twitter account. Be on the lookout for future announcements for those pub quizzes, and if they work if they're at a time that works for you, I can't recommend it highly enough. Even if trivia is not really your thing, even if you're not in it to win it necessarily, but it's still a nice time to hang out with like-minded Star Trek fans.
We'll be back next week, probably on Twitter. I think this has been kind of a fun little experiment, but will be a replay on YouTube, as always, that you can watch later on. We'll be back next week with some more Star Trek content to keep the discussion going. But you guys know the drill. To keep the discussion going, Facebook, Twitter, Discord server. I think we're slowly getting more people on the Discord server. That just makes for a great time. Keep the discussion going about Star Trek. So we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, everybody.